Hello, thank you for clicking on this video and for spending some time with me today. In this video, I want to pick up where I left off in telling you about my experiences with missed miscarriages. And if you're watching this video because it's something that you're going through, I am so incredibly sorry. It's a unique kind of pain to lose your baby and to feel like you're a prisoner in your own body. I'm really sorry that you're able to relate to any of the things that I talk about. I want to begin by giving you a little recap on what I talked about in my last video. My husband and I began trying for our first baby last year in September of 2024. I had just turned 29 years old, and it is currently June 2025. So in September of 2024, we had what I believed was a chemical pregnancy, and that was immediately followed by a missed miscarriage, or blighted ovum. And I managed that with the medication misoprostol or Cytotec at home, and I had my first period afterward in January of 2025. I then had 2 more periods that were relatively regular, and in February I thought I might have to have a surgery, but that was canceled due to a lack of informed consent and because I was told that I probably didn't need it anymore. So we went back to trying on our own, and I was tracking my basal body temperature every day, and I noticed that the luteal phase of my cycle, so the period between ovulating and actually getting your menstrual cycle, that phase seemed a little bit short. And then in March of 2025, it was a really strange month. Jimmy and I both just had an odd feeling about things. My temperature didn't spike in my predicted fertility window. It did ultimately spike, and then I started having a little bit of spotting. And at the first sight of that, if you have a history like mine, your mind immediately goes to thinking you're having a miscarriage. It didn't end up progressing that way, and so my mind then thought maybe this was an implantation bleed. That's a common thing that can happen in pregnancy, where the embryo starts to burrow into the lining of the uterus and a tiny bit of blood can be released. But then my spotting got heavier. Not heavy in that I thought it was a period or a miscarriage, because it was just a bit of heavy brown spotting that lasted for like 2 days after it had previously been light spotting for like 3 days before that. And so I was really confused on what was happening. I took a pregnancy test and it was negative. So I had began to believe that it was just going to take us a little bit of time to investigate what was going on with my body. And I had the thought that maybe I do have some sort of polyp, or maybe I do have retained tissue from the last miscarriage, because that's what I had scheduled the surgery for, that ultimately got canceled because I started having then a normal cycle. But like I said, this cycle was not normal. And so we set up a couple of virtual consultations with fertility clinics, and just kind of, actually we were at peace for the first time with our journey having to take a little bit longer. Like, this is the first time that I didn't feel like I was in a rush to just get pregnant again. So I was grateful for having that peace. And then It was a Friday. After having one of my consultations, I was getting ready for bed that night, and I'm looking in the mirror and I was like, I just feel a little bloated. And so I decided to go off to the other bathroom, not even tell Jimmy, and take a pregnancy test, not expecting to see anything. And sure enough, I take it, and that second line is there. It's positive. And I'm just in disbelief after everything that we've been going through. And so I called Jimmy in to the bathroom. He's shocked to see it. And so now we're having to switch gears and think, okay, maybe this is our time to have a baby. And so as soon as I got the positive test, I reached out to one of my old OBs to get a progesterone prescription, because like I had said, I noticed that my luteal phase was possibly a little bit short, which could be a sign of low progesterone. And progesterone is a fairly common thing that women supplement with in pregnancy, especially if they have a history of having issues with pregnancy. There's not really any risks associated with it. And so that OB prescribed some vaginal suppositories. I believe it was 150 milligrams. And I was supposed to start taking that every night. Once I got the positive test, I reached out to my midwives, and they wanted me to come in for a couple of blood draws to track my HCG and progesterone. So I did blood draws on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And the Tuesday, I had not yet started taking the progesterone suppositories. So we just got a baseline of where my progesterone is at. And then I started taking it. So on the Thursday, I had been taking it. And when I got the results of those blood tests, it showed that my numbers were rising appropriately. My HCG looked good. My progesterone the first day was, I think, 19. And then on Thursday, it had been 16, which, I mean, of course you don't want to see it going down, but hormones can somewhat fluctuate. And 16 is still in that normal range for being so early in pregnancy. Just for your reference, progesterone of 11 would be an indication that you're going to have a miscarriage, that it's inevitable. But 16 is still okay at that point. So we started to believe that things were going well. But then that next weekend, it was on a Sunday, I had this random bleeding episode. Ton of bright red blood at once. So, of course, Jimmy and I assumed it was a miscarriage. But then the bleeding tapered off. I didn't have any cramping. The next day I went in for another blood draw with my midwives, and we got set up for an ultrasound on a Tuesday. And we went in for the ultrasound, and we saw the baby, and we saw a heartbeat, and it was, I was measured at 5 weeks and 6 days at that point. So really, really early. Obviously, you're not seeing a whole lot on the ultrasound, but that was farther than we'd ever made it before. Then we go in at 8 weeks for another blood draw, and while I was with the midwives, they offered to use the Doppler on me to check on baby. And when she did, on her laptop, I immediately saw where the baby was. I saw the heartbeat. The heartbeat had gotten stronger. The heart rate went up. It was in the 140s. And so I remember leaving that appointment and just feeling so happy. And I remember texting people like, wow, this is the first time I've had an appointment where we just got good news and saw what was to be expected. And making it to 8 weeks with a heartbeat, like when you look up the statistics, the chance of having a miscarriage after that is really low. So we were encouraged by that, but our next appointment wasn't until 12 weeks. So that month went incredibly slowly, and for the most part, I still had all of my symptoms going on to reassure me, but there would be some days where I didn't feel them as strongly, but at the same time, I knew as I was approaching the second trimester that you tend to feel better. So that's not abnormal to see your symptoms fluctuate and get better over time. And then finally we went into the 12-week appointment with the midwives. I remember walking in and everyone just like hugging me and cheering for me that we had made it. And so we sit down, and I remember saying to her, like, hey, I know that chances are everything's going to be fine, but just in case something has happened, like, how are you going to talk about it? And will you make sure to tell me what you're seeing? And she said, oh yeah, like we'll of course we'll handle that as it comes up, and but I'm confident that we'll see what we need to see with baby. And so we lay back again on that couch, and she's using the Doppler. It's hooked up to her laptop, and when it pops up on the screen, we just weren't seeing much. We saw that my uterus was there, big black area. We weren't seeing even where the baby was at all with their technology. We weren't seeing a heartbeat anymore. And so I had just turned away. The midwife kept going, trying different angles, but at that point I couldn't look anymore. I had that gut feeling that here we go again, that we've lost it. And those emotions are starting to overwhelm me, and eventually the midwife kind of put down her sensor and put her hand on me and said, I'm so sorry that we're not seeing what we wanted to see today. So Jimmy and I, we just lost it and embraced each other. The midwives, they gave us a moment, and eventually they come back in and they're hugging us, they're crying with us, and they were just so great throughout this whole process. Like, thinking about them, like, I've come in for so many little appointments and I've reached out to them with all these questions, and we had not paid them a dime for any of their services, because this midwifery group is their services come into play for the most part at the end of pregnancy during delivery. And so I don't know, it was really nice to be surrounded by people that have been on this journey with us, and just felt so bad for us. And they said that we would need to go in for an ultrasound to confirm things, and so they called over to their gal that they work with. I was able to go directly there, and with the transvaginal ultrasound, you could kind of see where the mass of the baby was and the stillness, and so she had confirmed that we had another missed miscarriage. Jimmy and I went home feeling really defeated, and just like, we couldn't believe that we were going through this again. After all the good signs that we had saw up until this point, it just the being pulled in all these directions, and it's really hard to even think back into getting that into that mindset or emotional state that we were in, and finding out that it was another missed miscarriage. So I was then faced with the question of what to do from here. And I asked questions because this time around, with making it to 8 weeks, the baby was more developed than it was the first time with the blighted ovum. So I was asking, am I able to manage this at home with medication? And they said that since they had not seen the placenta being developed in the ultrasound, that meant that medication could still be a good option for me. If they did see the placenta forming, then it would likely be recommended to get a D&C just to be safe, because there's a lot more going on down there. And so that was over Memorial Day weekend, and I got the medication on a Friday. I took it early afternoon, and here's a trigger warning, again, for anyone that does not want to hear about blood, tissue, anything like that happens with a miscarriage. So I took the medication early afternoon and almost immediately started feeling pretty bad. Like I was getting the chills, and a couple hours later, again, just like last time, had started passing the blood clots. And I remember feeling worse than I did the first time. The cramping was more intense. I felt more exhausted this time around. I did end up passing a large mass of tissue that was about the size of a tennis ball. And this time I was expecting there to be more, since the baby was more developed as compared to the first time. But things seemed to be kind of tapering off for the night, so we went to bed, and the next morning I was continuing my routine of getting between the shower and the toilet, because I felt like I probably hadn't passed all of the tissue, that the midwife said I could take a second dose of the medication. So I did that pretty early in the day. And then something I forgot to even mention in the last video with managing the miscarriage, like when I get in the shower, I take my fingers inside of myself to feel what's happening with my cervix, to see how dilated it is, to feel if there's any tissue going on. And I was able to help some of it come out. And I think that's a really important thing for why I had success with misoprostol, because the emergencies that women often have with taking it is that there's too much bleeding going on. And again, the bleeding is the body trying to flush out that tissue. But sometimes the tissue can get stuck in the cervix, and you just continue to bleed and bleed without any progress. But for me, since I'm so in tune with my body and feel really comfortable with feeling inside and knowing what I'm feeling like around my cervix, that on that Saturday, I noticed that it felt like some tissue was stuck in my cervix, and it was like I could feel it, but I was only able to break off little pieces. I couldn't get really a good grip on it. So I told my midwives, and at that point in the day, like the bleeding had not gotten any heavier. I was barely having any bleeding. I just felt kind of stuck. And so the midwives told me that I could come out to their office the next day on that Sunday, and that they would take a look. So they did that. They said that they did see some tissue in my cervix, and they offered to help work it out with their instruments. And so I was like, yes, please. I was so grateful that they were able to offer me to come in last minute like this and help me. And so I just sat there and bared it. And at some points it was pretty painful with them manipulating my cervix without any anesthesia or pain meds or anything, but I didn't really care because I was determined to help this along to hopefully avoid having surgery or some other medical emergency that I would need to go to the hospital for. And they said they were able to clear out some of that tissue and that I left there with my cervix being cleared. And they said that if I wanted to, I could take another dose of the medication because if there is any more tissue, maybe now it's able to flush itself out now that the cervix isn't being blocked. And so I took the dose home, and on the next day, Monday morning, I took it, and again, I felt really bad, had the cramps, headache, stomach ache, all of that, but I was barely bleeding at all. I didn't really pass any more tissue. And so we set up another ultrasound the next day on a Tuesday. I go in, and she said that she thinks that there could still be tissue in there, which was just another thing, right? It's like, of course, I have this issue. I'm probably going to have surgery. And that night I went home, and I, again, was feeling bad. Like, I was having some stomach aches. The chills were kind of back. I was extremely emotional about the loss that we've been going through. And so I was kind of worried. I'm like, am I starting to develop an infection? Because that's another thing to be aware of when you're taking the expectant management approach of like watching and waiting, that like, yeah, sometimes it takes a while for that tissue to come out on its own, but it is also possible that as it sits there, that it can develop an infection. So I was concerned. I was reaching out to everyone that I know, figuring out how I should move forward. And one of our cousins got us connected with a local nurse practitioner who works for a holistic place, and she was a godsend that day. So I was on a Wednesday, and although I wasn't feeling great, I was definitely feeling better than I did the night before. But the nurse practitioner, her name is Brandy, she had me call her, explain what had happened, and then she offered for me to come into her office right then and there, or on my lunch break, or after work, like whenever was convenient for me. And how often does that happen, where the providers are doing what's convenient for you? Not very often. So I was just so grateful that she was willing to have the long conversations with me and have me come out to her office. So I left work early that day, I sat down with her, she took all my vitals, she did a blood draw, and we started talking about my options. And my vitals were looking fine. I was physically feeling better. So she said that she didn't see that I was having a sign of infection, and that there are a few ways we can move forward. She said that she has a friend of hers that's an OB and midwife, and that she would likely be willing to do a D&C for me should I need it. But she said that because I don't look like I'm currently in critical condition, that we can see what the blood work says, and as long as like the numbers don't stay super high over time, then we could continue expectant management. The blood work came back at 139 for my HCG, and I don't remember the units for it, but basically it's really low. And so she was saying that with my numbers being that low, that I likely don't have much tissue retained, if at all. And so I went back the next week, got another blood draw, and I also had my last ultrasound sent over to her and the OB so that they could take a closer look, since the technician had said that she thought it looked like there was still tissue in my uterus. but they looked at it and said that it looked pretty normal given that I had just had a miscarriage. And the second week's blood draw showed that my HCG had went down more at 91. So that was all good. And again, I've been feeling better. I haven't like had any more bleeding. So now we're just coming up with a plan on how to start testing things to make sure, both for myself and for Jimmy, that our bodies are okay to proceed with trying again. Because since we've had so many losses, like, I really want to make sure that there's not something going on with us that's contributing to this, aside from just dumb luck. And that's what I really liked about this nurse practitioner, that she was explaining that because I had been on contraceptives for so long, that it is possible that it's just taking a while for my body to balance out those hormones in order to hold a pregnancy, because pregnancy is one of the most complex things that our bodies can go through. There are a lot of spots where things can go wrong, and it does require those hormone levels to be in the right position. And so she just made me feel like, okay, it could have just been chance that I had these miscarriages, but I'm also not being told that it's just bad luck and I need to try again. She's still encouraging me that testing can be beneficial, like to check for blood clotting disorders, check my thyroid, check for autoimmune conditions, Rh factor. I can look more closely at my digestion, and we need to look at Jimmy, get a sperm analysis, possible DNA fragmentation. Like, there are so many avenues to explore now. And so that's where we're at here in June of 2025. I think that this second missed miscarriage has been handled. I'm now waiting for my next menstrual cycle. Brandy gave me a heads up that the next couple of menstrual cycles I could have heavier bleeding, because like it takes a while for my uterus to filter out everything that has happened, and again to get those hormones at the right level. So while we're waiting for the next few months to get my hormones on track, we're going to be doing as much testing as we can. I've entered a investigative mode, and I am determined to get to the bottom of what's going on. And as much as we're filled with grief and sadness, I'm also really fired up about the future, and I have faith that we will get it figured out and that we will meet our baby one day. So I'll definitely keep everyone posted on what happens moving forward. And I just appreciate you being here and hearing my story. And if there's any way that I can help you guys, or just be a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on, please let me know. Take care.